Welcome to Minerva. Today we are going to tackle Burda 6496. We're going to make this gorgeous rayon challis dress in this Minerva exclusive fabric. It's got peacock feathers all over it. It's so beautiful. It's a faux wrap, and you know, if you've tried wrap dresses and you just don't like the way they look, which is an issue for me, I've never been able to wear a wrap dress. I've made all kinds of them and they just don't look right. This faux wrap is dynamite. It's up a little high and has darts here that fit from the top and the bottom on both sides, and then this comes together and it's faux. So this wrap is attached to the skirt, so there's no reveal, if you will. It's very comfortable, yet it looks like a wrap dress because it has this surplice top. So it's beautiful, and this fabric is just stunning on. So in this lesson, to make this Burda Sewalong dress, we are going to talk about bias binding on the sleeves. We're going to make some bias binding, matching up darts, the surplice top, and facings. And that's what we're going to tackle on this dress today. Now, one word of caution. I made a sample dress. I actually made a top. I just cut it short out of something that I had floating around because I wanted to make sure that this crossover was right and that these darts and the length was going to fit me here. So it will behoove you, since there's no sleeves or anything, it really didn't take that long, to just cut out the bottom pieces and cut out the front and the back and stitch it up really quick. You don't have to put a zipper in, you don't have to do any top stitching or facings. So we're going to get started putting this little beauty together. And make sure you share all your makes on Minerva because I can't wait to see what you do with this pattern. Okay, we have all of our pattern pieces cut out. We interfaced the two pieces of facing, the back neck facing and the two front facings. And I want to talk about interfacing for just a quick second. This is the interfacing that we used here, and all the information will be in the documents down below. But see how nice and lightweight this is. It's soft, it's iron-on, it's got some stretch. You want to have an interfacing that has a little bit of give to it. Even though we're using this fabric that has no stretch, these pieces are going to move and you don't want that interfacing to become undone, right? So enough said about interfacing. Make sure you get the right interfacing, nice and lightweight, just enough to give it some body. So we've interfaced piece 6 for this dress and piece 2A. We've interfaced both of those, and I've also finished off the edges. If you don't have a serger or an overlocker, you could use the step zigzag on your machine, or just a plain zigzag, or even pinking shears if you have those. That will work. We have a 5/8 inch seam allowance on this dress, so we want to keep that in mind. And also, one of the first things they want you to do is go through and do all the darts on the dress pieces. So all the skirt pieces, all the bodice pieces. I think that's a little aggressive. I'm going to do them as each piece by piece, only because I don't want to handle these pieces 3 and 4 times. So I'm going to work with the top first. We're going to construct the top piece. So I'm going to do those darts, and then as I pull out the bottom pieces, I will do the darts for those. I like to keep my pattern tissue and my fabric pieces together until I'm ready to use them, because that way they don't get mixed up, and if I happen to put the project aside, I don't lose track of where I am. So the first thing we're going to do is take piece 1 and we're going to sew these darts in. Now on this dress, you want to take care that you are as accurate as possible with the darts, because you can see from these line drawings, this is the skirt dart and this is the bodice dart. They line up perfectly, and then this fold here, the faux wrap, lines up with the dart underneath here, which has another dart underneath the skirt. So, and it's the same in the front. You want those pieces to line up as best you can, because that you're going to have a nice visual. Now this fabric, this beautiful peacock fabric, will give us a little leeway because it's very busy and it's a kind of an all over print. But if you do a solid like this red dress, you need to be spot on with matching up your darts. That's really important. So we're going to go put the darts in this front piece here and the darts in our upper back, which would be piece Piece 5. We'll put the darts in both of these top pieces, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about the facing. All right, I sewed in the 2 back darts and the 2 front darts on my bodice. And a little word about darts. You want to sew them super skinny and start at this end up here. So they would go into your machine, and I actually go against convention and I take 2 back stitches. I stitch forward 2 and then I stitch back 2 to secure the end of my dart. But you want this super skinny up here. So if you start up here, you have a better chance of getting it. You have a better chance of getting it super skinny. You don't want to have this like kind of bump there, because that will create an issue. The other thing you can do, especially on this dress where it has a lot of darts, is so these are my 2 back pieces, and I want to measure them and make sure they're the same length and the same width, and then I can look at them this way and make sure they're the same width. So that's important. Then we want to press them flat. So you press them just the way you stitch them. We press them flat, and then the darts in the back go towards the center back and the darts in the front go towards the center front. So this is good. And now I'm going to lay them out in front, my pieces out in front. So here's one front piece. I'm going to lay them out right side up because I don't want to make a mistake, right? And that's just, we don't want to do that. Especially since there's 4 pieces here, right? Because we have the zipper going on in the back, we want to make sure that we get the shoulder seams sewn together correctly, which is the next step. So if I lay it out flat, there is less of a chance of me sewing like a side seam to a shoulder seam, or having these 2 reversed. That would be bad. So this is my zipper in the back, my neckline, and my shoulder seams. So now I can just pin them. You know, I always lay everything out in front of me. It just is a habit that I've learned after all these years. I can go back and pin this nicely, but now they're pinned and I know that I'm not going to make a boo-boo and sew the wrong pieces, which we don't want to do. Additionally, I sewed my facing pieces together, so you have a front facing and a back neck facing, because we have a zipper in the back. So I've sewn both of those together and they are ready to go. Alrighty, we sewed our shoulder seams together, front and back, on each piece. We have kind of these odd looking pieces here. And what we want to do is sew on our facing. Now, since I finished the edges of my seam allowance with my overlocker, I pressed, instead of pressing them open, I pressed the seams on this dress to the back. So I pressed the facings towards the front. So they're going in opposite directions. So now we're going to put our facings on. Let's start with this piece here. So here is my neck edge and my front leaning edge. And I want to start right at that seam allowance. And I can line these up pretty good, but then I can get my fingers in there and move them around so they're right up against each other. And that makes it so easy to get a really crisp juncture. And I'm going to go back and pin this neck edge. We want to be careful we don't stretch these neck edges out because they're all cut on the bias. And then the leading edge along the front. Now these facings are cut on the bias, which is wonderful. I love that. It doesn't always happen that way, and when they're not cut on the bias, they tend to be very stiff. And this one is pliable and works with this really nice curved seam here. We're just going to pin it all the way down to the bottom here. I'm going to go ahead and do the other one and stitch these, and then we're going to understitch them, and I'll take you over to the machine and show you exactly how to do that. All right, we're going to talk a minute about how you get this absolutely beautiful edge on your facing. Certainly you can completely line the interior of this bodice and you won't have to deal with facings popping out, but the pattern calls for facings and that's what we're going to use today, and I want to show you how to put them in perfectly. So I've stitched, this one's actually all stitched down, and look at how, and pressed, how beautiful that looks, right? I mean, that's pretty nice. That's going to look great on the neck edge. So let's talk about how that happens. We've sewn the facing to the top of the blouse. I've actually finished the edges. That's an option. Then along this neck curve, you want to clip into the seam allowance. And what that does is it releases the fabric a little bit, so the fabric will actually lie flat when you turn it. And also a little ways down the front, because you have a convex and a concave seam. And you can see, because I butted those seams together, that I have like an absolutely perfect juncture there. So that works out really well. Now what I want to do is I want to attach my seam allowance to my facing, and that's called understitching. You're not going to see it, it's structural. So I want to press everything towards the facing. I want to press the seam allowances towards the facing, and I want to make sure that I don't have any folds here in the facing or the dress. Sometimes you'll get something that looks like that, and if you stitch that in, it's not going to work right. So you want to take it to the iron, press it, make sure everything is nice and smooth and pressed to one side. And then I want to use my edge foot. If you have an edge foot, that's great. This little foot has a little tacky bar down at the bottom. I'm going to use that. Some machines have a gauge that you attach. You can certainly use that. For this machine, this foot works really well, and then I move my needle to the left. And what this bar does is it rides along this seam allowance, or if I was doing top stitching, it would ride along the edge of my garment. So it will give me a really nice straight stitch. I'm just going to enter this in here. And as I'm sewing, I'm not pulling, but I'm making sure that my seam allowance is to the facing. I'm stitching on the facing, and everything is nice as flat, and I don't have any of those little bubbles. And then I use that little bar to ride along this seam line. So as I'm approaching this juncture at the shoulder, and this little curve gets a little curvy, I want to go a little slower, take my time. There's a lot of fabric there. So now when I take this to the iron, so you can see that I've stitched the interfacing and facing and seam allowance all together. And when I take this to the iron, it will roll without hardly any effort at all, even around this really nice curve for the back neck edge. So a good press, and you have an absolutely beautiful facing. Gorgeous. Now I would go back and tack, because the facing is going to slide out, I would just tack these seam allowances together here, just a couple of quick tacks, and that will help keep it in place, because it's going to be attached at the bottom where the bottom of the bodice hits the skirt, and it'll also be attached at the zipper. But this will just give you another layer of protection. Just a needle and thread really quickly, a couple of hand stitches just to hold it in place, and then your facing will function the way it's supposed to, and it won't be flopping around driving you bananas. And now that we have these beautiful front pieces, bodice pieces all faced, we want to put the two front pieces together in the surplice top. So what I like to do is take the drawing, because I'm not good at left right, it's so much easier to look at the drawing, and this is the right side of the fabric, so we want this piece to be on top. You can see that this piece is on top, and we're lining up on the darts. So I want to take this point and line it up on this dart, and if you did it right, we are going to have a beautiful surplice top that lies. Look at that. Oh, I'm so excited. Yay. And this lies on top of this dart. And then look at that. That fits gorgeous in between. So our goal at this point is to just run a basting stitch across here just to hold those pieces together. That way when we sew the skirt to the bodice, we won't have all these pieces flopping around. And then the other thing that we need to do to finish up the bodice at this point is to sew these side seams. To just sew up the side seams, and you can press them open, or if you're finishing them like I am, you can press them to the back, and then when we do the skirt, we will press that to the front. Okay, now is a good time to try your top on. Make sure everything fits the way you expected it to. You can have somebody pin it up the back for you. You want to make sure that this is crossed over enough. And I actually saw someone wearing a surplus top the other day, and there was a snap in here. So if you're worried about this flopping around, you could sew a little snap in there. She had hers undone and it looked fine. You could actually see the snap, but I thought that was a really genius idea. So, and we've sewed the side seams, so it's a perfect time to try it on. Now, we're going to bind off the arms, and if you've never worked with bias binding before, you are absolutely going to love it, especially when you use binding that matches your fabric. So you have pattern piece 7. This is your bias binding, and you can see that it's cut. You have to cut it right on the bias. So this arrow needs to go perpendicular to the selvage, and that puts that on the bias, which makes the fabric stretchy. So that's really important. I'm going to go off script a little bit for the bias binding for the sleeve. Now, there's tons of ways to put them in. They're all correct. This method is great. The way I like to do it is a little bit simpler, so we're going to go that way. So we have this strip that we've cut, piece 7, and we're going to sew the ends together and make a big circle. So this big loop, and then we're going to fold it in on itself and press it. Right? So we have wrong sides together. Pretty simple, right? Then take this seam and we're going to attach it to our side seam. So we find our armhole and our side seam, and I'm going to pin it to my side seam, making sure that I pushed the seam allowance of my facing in a different direction of the seam allowance of my blouse, because it will give us less bulk. And then I'm just going to pin this all the way around, pin the binding, bias binding, all the way around the armhole. So I'm pinning it to the right side of the bodice, and it's nice and stretchy, and it will curve around the arm. You just need to take your time, and if you're at all nervous, you can always just baste it on there after you pin it, just to make sure that you did it right. If that makes you more comfortable, then you definitely should go ahead and do that. But this fits really beautifully. I didn't have any trouble stitching it on. Goes all the way around. Now, if your fabric is a little heavier than mine, you might want to make your bias binding a little bit smaller, and that will help it from kind of sticking out. Because typically, like if you do bias binding around a neck edge or something, it is smaller than the opening, not the same size. And in this case, it's the same size. So I've sewn this sleeve down. You can see I attached the binding and I stitched it. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this edge, and then I'm going to clip into it, because then what happens is we press the bias binding to the inside. So you're going to have something that looks like this, and then it's top stitched in place, and that finishes off your armhole. So that's a really nice way to do it, especially when you have a sleeveless dress, because if you see the inside, you see the same fabric, or if for some reason you don't quite get it right, you see the same fabric, you don't see a weird color. And the bias binding that you buy in the store in those packages is very, very stiff. This is much softer, and I'm working with this super soft fabric, so I want something that's comparable. That is it. That's all that's to putting the bias binding in on the sleeve. It's very simple, and the outcome is just very high-end and stunning. All right, I stitched my bias on, I finished off my edge, and I've pressed everything towards the outside of the arm sleeve. And this is a pressing hem. If you've never used one of these, it's inexpensive and it's a great tool for things like this. You can get a curve on here, so you want to press this after you've stitched it. You want to press it all the way around the way you stitched it, right? So I stitched it like this. I'm going to press it, and then I go back and press it again this way. So everything is going in the same direction. And then I can go back and press it a third time, and I get a really nice edge, which brings me to the top stitching on the finished edge of my sleeve. So this is my finished sleeve. I've gone around and top stitched it, and it's all bound off, and it looks great. Okay, and you know, I missed a little bit on the inside. I'll just go back and stitch that by hand, but because I didn't trim down the bias binding, pretty much it's anchored all the way around. And when I go in and tack down the facing, I'll just tack down those little spaces that I missed. That's not a big deal. Yeah, so those are the sleeves, and now the top is finished, which is great. And we're going to turn our attention to the skirt. The next step is to work on the over skirt, the piece that's actually going to go over an overlay. And there's only one piece of this. This is piece 10. You only cut one. So you want to make sure when you cut it that the pattern piece is right side up on your right side of your fabric, because you need for this side. If you have the reverse, it won't work with your cross for your front. You'll have to reverse those. And this piece, this fold, measures 1.5 inches. It's this fold, 1.25 inches. It's this fold line here on the pattern, and it measures 1.25 inches. So we want to finish off this leading edge, and we want to fold this in 1.25 inches. So I'm going to fold it in 1.25 inches first, so I make sure that I have a nice straight line. Then I'm going to go back and just finish off that edge. Now, if I knew that this skirt was the absolutely right length, I would, after I press it on that press line, I would turn this, and I'm going to stitch this here. This is what they're talking about in the directions. So when I make the hem, it will be fine. And I'm going to go and approach that after I've finished and tried the dress on, just to make sure that the hem is exactly where I want it, because at that point, if I want to shorten it, I just have to take that out. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go press this in under 1.25 inches. Then I'm going to finish this edge, and I'm also going to put the dart in here. There's a dart up at the top, so I'm going to go take care of that. All right, here's my skirt overlay. I've put my dart in. I've also folded this over 1 inch, and I took 1/4 inch off of the edge of that, and I finished my lower edge. So now I can hold this up. You can pin it to the bodice, or you can hold it up to make sure that the length is going to be correct, because there's a couple of things that we need to do. We want to hem this before we sew it into the side seam of the skirt, because you can't do it after that. So this has to be hemmed first. But before we do that, I just want to check and make sure that it's going to work with my bodice, right? I want to make sure that this is the time, if I need to make adjustments, that I want to make adjustments. So here's my surplus top. This edge that I have folded under is going to match up to where, to where the dart and this long piece of the top comes in. So I'm going to match that up there, and then I want to make sure that this dart matches up in the front, and then of course my side seam will match up if we've cut it correctly. So I'm good with that. That's important, because that's like right front and center. So now we're going to fix the hem. The hem on this is 1 5/8 inches, and I've taken off a little bit with my finishing. This is where I've folded in my facing, right? My self facing. I'm going to fold it back on itself, right on that seam. And I'm going to measure up 1.5 inches, because I've taken a little bit off. So I'm going to measure up 1.5 inches. and I'm going to stitch across, whoopsie, I'm going to stitch across where that pin is. And what will happen is after I do that, it will turn around and I'll have this really nice corner here, and I can fold up my hem. So I'm going to top stitch my hem. The pattern recommends stitching this facing down by hand. I'm going to stitch it with the machine. All right, now we're on to our skirt front. And because we didn't sew all those darts in the beginning, we have to go in and sew them. These are really long, thin darts. So if you're at all nervous about them, especially if you're working with a fabric that's bouncy, like a crepe, this fabric is a little bouncy. It sews beautifully, but it is a little bouncy. So you can mark them, pin them, and then iron them with the pins in it. If you have glass head pins, you can iron over them, iron it with the pin over them, and then you'll have this really nice crease. It'll be a lot easier to sew. And again, make sure you start down here at the point because they're pretty narrow. I mean, that's a pretty narrow dart, and they're long. They take a long time to get from one end to the other. So I have my darts sewn in and they're pressed to the center, and now I am going to take my overlay skirt that is finished. So I've finished the hem. I have finished the hem, so you can see I folded this in and I folded in my hem, and that makes a really nice little triangle there. And the reason you do it this way is so if this opens, you don't see the hem, right? The first thing you see is this facing, so it kind of hides that edge of the hem. So this is done, and I'm going to lay it over my skirt front, matching the side seams and the darts. I'm just going to pin it, and again we're going to run it, just run it through the machine because we want to make it, it's much easier if it's just kind of stitched together and then it's like one unit instead of a couple of pieces. And this leading edge that we folded, because we measured it against our top and all of these pieces come together, should be right here at this dart, and we are lucky, it's perfect. So I'm going to baste this piece going across here, and then I am going to put the darts in my back, two back pieces, because we have a zipper going on, and I'm going to sew the side seams together. Right, so now we have a skirt that is open in the back, so we'll have a center panel with two side panels and this overlay on top, and we're getting very, very close to finishing. But don't skip this step. Baste this on. You'll be much happier because now it'll be one piece and you don't have all the extra flopping around. All right, our skirt is all put together. Isn't this gorgeous? I just love this fabric. So before I stitched the side seams, I stitched all the way down, just like we stitched the panel to the front here. I stitched it all the way down on the side. And so I have my center panel, my overlay, and then one side back and the other side back. And now we are going to attach the top to the bottom. So we're going to flip the top to the bodice, and a couple of things that we want to be aware of. We want to make sure that where this cross is matches this overlay at the seam allowance. So just because it matches here, it needs to match at the seam allowance. That's where we want to put it together. So we're going to line that up. And this is the opportunity, you know, if you have to make any changes, now is the time. So you can baste this seam, sewing the top to the bottom, and then make sure everything lines up the way you expect it to. And then try it on and pin it, because if you need to adjust the darts a little bit, this is the time to do it. This is really the time that you want to make the adjustments before you put the zipper in, because it's still flat and it will be easy. So we're going to line up our side seams, and because we pressed the top seam allowance towards the back and the skirt to the back and the top to the front, we press them in opposite directions. Whichever way you press them, they're in opposite directions, and they butt up together. And then we're going to line up our dart from the back. That lines up beautifully, and then we should end up with our back seam perfectly lined up. Look at that. That's really exciting. And again, if you're at all worried about it, just baste it. All right, and we'll do this side, same thing. Line these up. Because these are the these vertical lines, you're going to see the darts and everything coming together. So if you don't want to rip it out, like I said, it only takes a second to baste it, and then you can take it apart. So that fits together beautifully. And I made a sample garment, and that one also went together perfectly. So I'm really happy with the way these pieces fit together. So I'm going to stitch this. I'm going to try it on, make sure I'm happy with the way it fits and everything looks good, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk invisible zipper. So we are nearing the end of completing our dress. I sewed the top to the bottom, and you want to take care that this juncture here where the wrap comes together and all the darts comes together beautifully. I made sure that that all lined up. I did have to take it out once or twice to make sure that it lined up properly. And then side seams, right, all lined up, darts, those are pretty close. I'm happy with that. So then I finished off my inner seam and I pressed it down. I know in the directions it says to press it up, but gravity will take it down, and you have all those darts, and it's just better if it goes down. And then I finished the edge of the back of both pieces of my back. So what we're gonna do now, I lie it backwards here so you can see the back. The next thing we're gonna do is put in the zipper. So here is my back, right, both of them, and I've finished off those edges however you are planning on, if and however you are planning on finishing them off. So again, I like to lay my pieces out the way they're going to look. So here is my back, and you want to open up this facing because we'll finish that at the very end. Now we're going to put in an invisible zipper, and if you've never put one in before, don't worry. It's super simple and it's very forgiving. And what makes it invisible is that the teeth are on the back. On a traditional zipper, the teeth are in the front. With this zipper, the teeth are on the back. You do want to get a zipper that matches the color of your fashion fabric as closely as possible. And in the instructions, they talk about an invisible zipper foot. Honestly, I have put in hundreds of zippers using my regular zipper foot. So you can do this without any special equipment. You just need the zipper foot that goes with your machine. And you can put in a beautiful invisible zipper, and we're going to go through that process. The very first thing you want to do, though, is to lightly, and I say lightly, iron this, because the teeth are rolled to the back. And to make it easier to install, you want to flatten those teeth out a little bit. They'll go back when we zip it up a couple of times. So I'm going to take this to the iron, and I'm just going to kind of unroll these teeth on both sides and flatten them out, and then we'll start with our zipper. All right, so I flattened these out with the iron just a bit. I mean, it is plastic, so you want to take care. And then I'm going to zip this up. So this is the way I want it to look, right? My fabric, both sides of my fabric is right side up. My zipper is right side up. This is eventually how it will all look. And this side of my garment, right, will fold in this way, and this side of my garment will fold in this way, and I'll have a beautiful invisible zipper. So to get there, it's a little counterintuitive. I'm going to walk you through it, so don't panic. The first thing we want to do is we want to sew this right side of the zipper to this right side of the garment. So I'm going to flip it over and pin it. And I want the very top of my zipper to be at the very top of the edge of my neck. Now, if you don't get it all the way up there, or if you would prefer a hook, that's certainly another option. I like to have mine just go all the way to the top. And then I'm going to unzip my zipper. And when you unzip it, it looks a little counterintuitive, because this is here, and you have this weird thing hanging out over here, but this is exactly, if you follow this step by step, you will be very successful. So we're going to go to the machine, we're going to put on our zipper foot, and we're going to sew this side of the zipper. First thing I'm going to do is change my zipper foot, and there are teeth on my zipper foot. There are teeth on a grab bar on either side. So depending on which side of the zipper I'm sewing, this is going to sit on the left side of my shank or the right side of my shank. So you can move this, you have to take it off and move it back and forth. So in this case, I have my zipper, and I want to sew as close to these teeth without sewing into them as possible on this side. So what I want is I want my zipper foot to ride this way down through my zipper. And this keeps the pressure on the two pieces of fabric, but at the same time it allows my needle to get very close to the seam allowance. And if you don't do it the first time, don't panic, because you have the opportunity to go back and do it a second time with this type of zipper without having to rip anything out. So it's wonderful. Oops, slippery fabric. So I'm going to stitch alongside these teeth, which is why we rolled them out. I'm going to stitch as close as I possibly can alongside these teeth all the way down, and you don't need to get all the way down to the bottom of this zipper. I'm going to go as far as my machine will let me, and I'm going to finish it there. Now you'll notice I didn't pin this, and that certainly is up to you. You feel free to pin if that makes you happy. But I'm just going to take my time and make sure the edge of the zipper tape matches the edge of my fabric. You also want to be careful. You can see I have everything up here on the table. You want to make sure that it isn't hanging off your table or your machine. That creates weight on the stitches and stress. I'm actually trying to keep it close so you can see it on the camera. Normally I would have it all crammed up in there. All right, I'm going to stop there because that's as far as my zipper foot will allow me to go. And we'll take it back to the table. We'll take a look at what we got. All right, so I've stitched that. It isn't as close as I would like, but that's okay. My goal for this first set of stitching was to make sure that my zipper tape and the edge of my fashion fabric matched up all the way down. That's really important because, again, if it's off, it's going to change the size, the circumference of the garment. So I can certainly go back and stitch a little closer, and I will do that after we're finished to make it prettier. But right now, I want to make sure that it zips up, that I didn't catch any of the teeth into my garment. That's perfect. And I'm going to lay it back out again like I would want it to look when it's finished. So you can see I have it sewn to one piece. And this looks pretty good. Right? Now I want to sew this side, the right side of this side of the zipper tape to the right side of this part of the garment. There's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. You want to keep this even at the top, right? We don't want to sew this with one neck edge higher than the other. So that's really important that we keep that at the top. You also need to know where you stopped at the bottom. So I'm going to line up my top and I'm going to put a little pin on my fabric right there where I stopped on the other side, because it's important when I go to finish the garment that I stop at the same place at the bottom. And sometimes you miss, you just have to go back and fix it. So now that I have my stop and I know my start here, this is going to be even. Here I'm going to unzip this just a smidge for the first moment because I don't want to lose the fact that these are going to be the same distance. And I'm going to turn this over so I'm sewing right sides together. And if you're unsure and you want to take a look, you can just zip it back up again and you'll see that this seam allowance on this side of the garment is actually folded into the zipper tape. So that's what we want. So I just want to make sure that I'm sewing it on correctly. Then I can unzip this. So I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to sew this zipper tape, this side of the zipper tape, and match it up with the edge of my garment. Now, the moment of truth, right? We're going to zip it up. And when you go to zip it up, it's always like this moment of panic because it's twisted a little and you go to zip it and it's like, wait, oh, that doesn't zip. And you have to kind of spin it around. So you have to be patient with yourself. And there it goes. Ooh, that's exciting. So it zips up. So you have a couple of things going on here. We have missed this just by a smidge, so I need to fix that. So it looks great. And you can see that you can actually see the zipper. It's not invisible. So the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this back to the machine and I'm going to concentrate on stitching these teeth. I'm going to open them up and I'm going to concentrate on stitching inside that other stitch so the teeth are closer. The stitching line is closer to the teeth. So I want to make sure that that happens, and then when I come back and zip it up, then it will be invisible. But we've accomplished our goal. The zipper is in. It looks great. Right? We're very happy with that. So we're going to go back and just take that a little bit closer so it's really an invisible zip. My zipper's in. I went back and restitched each side of the zipper tape a little closer to the seam allowance, and I'm very happy with it. One of the things I suggest you do as you stitch those seam allowances a little closer and you focus really on that stitching is that you zip up each side. After you've sewn one side, zip it up, because if you catch a stitch into one of these teeth, your zipper won't go up. And the easiest way to find it, once you know your zipper won't go up, you can just take your seam ripper and just kind of slide it along the back of the teeth. It's usually just a stitch or two, and that will take care of it. So I have this beautiful zipper now. Look at that. It's invisible. It looks great. I'm very happy with it. I went back and stitched, now that I know that everything is good, I stitched the ends of the tape up into my facing on each side. And I've tried this on a couple of times. I have decided that since I top stitched the arms and I top stitched the skirt that goes around and I'm going to top stitch the hem, I'm actually going to run a row of top stitching around both sides of the front because this facing keeps popping out and I don't like that. So what I will do to finish off the zipper is just turn this facing in on itself where the seam allowance is, turn this down, and zip it so you can see. So you have this really nice clean edge there. This I will hand stitch, and then I'm going to top stitch this neck edge all the way around, probably the same width as I did on the front, on this front panel here, because this is going to lead into it, so I want it to look the same. So that's an inch. I'm going to top stitch the neck edge all the way around for an inch. Now we have to finish off our zipper, and so you can see that you got this zipper in with a regular old zipper foot. If you have a invisible zipper foot, go ahead and use it by all means, but you don't need to go out and run out and buy one if you don't have one. So here's my zipper. You know, this tail end, the back is still open. My zipper is in, and what I need to do is I need to connect these two edges of the seams, the back seams, together. It's a little tricky and it can be a little fiddly. So if you're having trouble, if you're struggling using the machine, take a needle and thread and do it by hand. But this is the reason we want our zipper to end at the same spot on both sides of the seam allowance, because we need to go in here and start our seam right where that zipper ends. And that can be a little fiddly. And I would do this with the zipper foot for another, just an inch or so. You don't want to sew the whole seam with the zipper foot because you'll get a wobbly seam. So either sew this by hand, which I prefer to do because you don't want any skips in the back. If you have skips, when you look at the right side of it, there'll be a bump or a bubble right in a very inappropriate place. So at the bottom of the zipper, you can imagine what I'm talking about, right? So stitch that by hand or get your zipper foot in there and stitch that, and then we're going to finish up this seam with the rest with a regular stitching foot, a regular general purpose foot. And then I'm going to hem it, and the hem on this calls for 1 5/8 after you take off a little bit for the finishing edge. Essentially, you want it to land the same place where your overskirt lands, right? So this is my hem, and you can see when I sewed the side seam, my overskirt was stuck in there about 1 5/8 above the seam allowance. So this is my overskirt, and this is going to hem in the same spot, right? And then we are done. Our dress is done. It's stunning. It's so cute, and it really was a fairly easy pattern that has some really nice style detail. So I like this. So let's see how it looks. We did it. We finished. Yay. I love this dress. This Burda 6496 pattern is gorgeous. It fits really well. The fabric, this viscose challis from Minerva exclusive line, is gorgeous. So I want to thank you for joining us on this Minerva Sewalong.